Hello, everyone. My name is Bradley Chaplick, and I am a condominium lawyer at Horlick, Levitt, Lella. And we are live once again answering your questions. I can see the questions are starting to come in. We've had a bunch of interesting legal developments within the last week or so. The two big ones are that the clock for condominium AGMs, 2020 AGMs, is once again running, and also the City of Toronto and Peel region will be entering stage 3 reopening as of this Friday. So we'll talk about those two things, and we'll also talk about your questions. If you're new to the live stream, you put your questions in the chat. I will answer them for you to the best of my abilities. And to receive future videos, you can subscribe and click the little bell, and then you'll get a reminder when we post new videos. So that's it. Once again, my name is Brad, and let's get right into your questions. So first one comes from Harland. Are we able to insist that proxies be pre-populated with all the candidates' names on colored paper? So this is a question about putting conditions on the use of proxies. So the Condominium Act says that the proxy must be in the prescribed form, and the prescribed form is found on the Condominium Authority of Ontario website. And so in my view, you cannot create conditions on what will be a valid proxy that are more restrictive than what the Condominium Act says are the criteria for a valid proxy. So an owner who prints off their own copy of the proxy form from the website on regular white paper and fills it out by hand and submits it, that's a valid proxy, and you should not invalidate those proxies. So I hope that answers your question, Harland. And I know there's some case law about making criteria for proxies that was more restrictive than what the Condominium Act said, but that case law was based upon a previous version of the Condominium Act in which there was no mandatory proxy form. So now that we have a mandatory form, those are the criteria. Great question. Sylvia, good afternoon. We are reopening the indoor swimming pool at our condo building. Board agrees to have only 4 people at one time, and they must clean up after themselves after use. The cleaners shift is done at 11 a.m. This does not sit well with me that the owners are just expected to sanitize after use for the remainder of the day without a cleaner. Thoughts? Oh, okay, Sylvia. So for the indoor swimming pool, I guess I'm trying to figure out what would be the cleaning that the owners are expected to do. I mean, the pool itself is sanitized with cleaning chemicals, the change rooms. So I think the thing to do would be to have signs up that says, using the swimming pool is at your own risk, and to tell people that they're expected to sanitize any areas that they use before and after each use. So that way it's each owner's responsibility to clean whatever area that they want to use in the change room. They'll have to be provided with cleaning products. Just say, please sanitize your changing area before and after. And I think if you say that, then each person understands that this is something that they have to do, or if they choose not to do it, that it's at their risk. So I hope that can give you some guidance. But I mean, the swimming pools are allowed to be open, so you might also consider, Sylvia, as another option, getting extra cleaners. And I think that would be probably a good idea in your situation. So yeah, you can open up all the amenities, but it's not business as usual. You might have some additional cleaning costs associated with that. So those are all things for you to consider. Also, in order to have the pool running, I think you have to be doing readings every certain number of hours. So who's doing the pool readings, right? Every 4 hours. And can that person also be responsible for at least checking that the change rooms are properly sanitized or doing something along those lines as well? So things to consider, and I hope all of those suggestions can help you. Harland. Our buildings have an older population. How do we conduct the AGM with a 50-person limit where we have approximately 400 owners? Are we able to say only one person per unit? Okay. This is a large condominium corporation, and the director's saying that they have an older population, and the stage 3 in the GTA is going to allow no more than 50 people in an enclosed area. So first of all, you have to have a room that's going to be big enough that you can actually have 50 people seated with everyone being 6 feet away from everyone else. So that's its own challenge, right? It's not 50 people crammed into a room, it's 50 people spread out in a room. And then once you can figure that out, you have to say are you going to require masks at the meeting? I would assume yes. And then what about, you have all these people who want to come who don't fit in the room. So you have a bunch of options. One option is to make the meeting available for people to view electronically, so that those people who don't attend in person can at least see the meeting and participate via proxy. And I think you're just in a situation, Harlan, where you're going to be doing the best you can. So you're going to have a capped attendance at 50 people, but remember that includes not just the owners, but it's also going to include all the other people, right? It's going to include your property manager and your minute taker and any other meeting professionals who are in the room. You're going to be capped at a hard total of 50. So you might only have room for 45 owners, right? And of course that's not a quorum, so you'll need proxies in your case. So it's a big challenge, and I think you're going to have to look at a lot of options for other technologies to allow people to participate electronically should they desire to do so. You're going to encourage proxies and maybe allow people to simultaneously watch it, even if they're not in the room. And about your question about saying one representative per unit, I think that would be reasonable to say, fortunately we can only allow one representative per unit, or if a particular owner owns more than one unit, that person would still only be allowed one representative representing all those units, just to allow as many people as possible from as many different units to attend the meeting. And if I were you, I would also do it on an RSVP basis. So like either a lottery or first come, first serve, to say who can actually attend the meeting in person so that it's fair. Make people have to, pre-register basically, because you don't want people showing up at the meeting and being turned away. So it's a very big challenge for you, and I know you're hesitant to do the electronic meetings thing, but I think it should at least be an option for people to watch it electronically, so that there's some fairness to it and democratic participation. It's a very difficult challenge, Harlan. Okay, Andrea, now that we've ventured into phase 3, should we consider a regular AGM with participants in September? Oh, Bruna's saying she can hardly hear me. Okay, I will try and speak louder. So, Andrea, it depends on, I guess you're saying if your year end is March 31st, then you're going to have a September 30th AGM deadline. Whether you do a regular meeting in person or whether you do an electronic meeting is going to depend upon your particular condominium community. I know me personally, I will not be attending meetings in person. So I will be available to chair electronic meetings, but I will not be attending in person, because you can imagine, when the crunch comes in September, October, November, and you've got meetings every night. It's not safe for me or for the people who I'm going to see if I'm in a different room of 50 people every night. It's too much. So the only option for me is to say I'm only doing electronic meetings, and any in-person meetings I'm just not going to go. I think that that's going to be the norm for not just the lawyers but also the auditors. And so if you want to have your lawyer and your auditor at your meeting, then you're probably looking at an electronic meeting. And if you have a very small condominium corporation and people want to do it in person and feel comfortable, maybe in person is okay, but some people won't come because it's in person, and I think that that's something you have to think about. So back to Harlan's question. Do we have to have unanimous consent from all board members to pass a resolution for electronic board meetings? Okay, so this is sort of there's a background to this question to understand it. So under normal circumstances, the answer is to have an electronic board meeting requires unanimous consent of all directors. An electronic board meeting means a meeting by teleconference or video conference. So if any person objects, then the meeting cannot be held electronically. That's the normal situation. Right now, there is a temporary amendment to the Condominium Act. That temporary amendment says that you no longer require a unanimous consent, and that temporary amendment will remain in force until at least November 21st, and it might stay longer than that if it's extended before that time. But as of now, let's assume that it doesn't get renewed. Any board meetings after November 21st, you will once again require unanimous consent to have electronic board meetings, and that consent can be signed in advance, so you don't have to do it fresh each meeting, but you can still have directors objecting. So again, we're going to have a similar problem to we have with the meetings of owners, which is some directors might refuse to attend in-person meetings, for any legitimate reason. And if they were to do so, then you would be basically saying to people that they should be consenting so that electronic meetings can happen. And if someone were to refuse for, improper purposes or political purposes, that would be improper. Okay. Olivia. Hi, Brad. Good afternoon. How are you? I'm great. Thank you. Will there be any penalty or issue with the CAO if the Condo Corp does not hold the AGM within the deadline? Can we have it later this year or even next year? There's no penalty. There's no condo police if you hold your AGM late. But with the provisions in place that allow for electronic meetings, you should really be able to do it. And it might not be perfect, but it should be possible to hold an electronic meeting, even if the business of the meeting is done by proxy, and you just have like an electronic discussion session or whatever you do. You can make electronic meetings work, and then if it's just a question of being a little bit late, that's not a big deal. Condominium corporations miss their 6-month deadline, or in this case it'll be an extended deadline for some condos, by days or weeks. Very common. In my view, it's like it's a trivial breach to just be like a few days late or something like that, as long as your intent is to have the meeting as soon as possible. Especially this year, for some condos, they're going to have, if you have February or March year end, you're on a really tight timeline to have your meeting. So but I don't think you should just say, no, we're going to do it next year. I think you should make a concerted effort to try and hold the AGM electronically and get it done. And then that way you've really done the best you can. And if it's impossible, if you do everything you can to try and hold the meeting electronically and it just doesn't work, that's something different. But if you didn't try, that's not the best. So, Olivia. Okay, question from property manager. Hello, does the board resolution consent for electronic meetings transfer to new board members? No. When you have a change in the board and you have new directors, you should get those new directors to sign a consent for electronic board meetings. It doesn't, one director's consent does not transfer over to another director. So get it redone every time you have a change on the board. Great question. Bruna, can we do a hybrid AGM? Voting is done by proxy, meeting hosted via Zoom, etc. Yeah. So question about hybrid AGM. There's lots of different things that people can do. Yeah, I think that's to say that you're going to do the election for directors by proxy, and then maybe some of the other motions by like a show of hands on Zoom. I think that's reasonable. Just everyone's trying to do the best they can to have an electronic meeting, but it is possible, in case you're wondering, to do an election of directors on Zoom. Zoom has like polls that you can do where you send out a poll up, and then people pick one option, and you can just put in the names of the candidates, and you can get back votes electronically. So it can be done on Zoom without too much difficulty. The only challenge is it's not anonymous how people vote. Like the person hosting the meeting would see how people voted, and also it's difficult to control if people, more than one person from a unit signs in to the meeting. Then you could get potentially more votes than you're supposed to have. So you have to be really careful how you control access to the meeting. But to answer your question, you can do it hybrid. You can figure out a way to do it by proxy and then sort of just host the meeting over Zoom. And you can also just do your election on Zoom. It can be done, especially if it's a smaller condo. Excuse me. Olivia, our AGMs are always held inside our recreation center, which we have amenities such as gym, pool, meeting rooms. The normal setup is we have one big room set up just for AGM participants. Okay. So this is, I guess, about postponing the AGM and stuff. Yeah. Okay, Olivia. I mean, look, that seems normal to me, and you might be thinking about doing something similar to what Harlan suggested, which is having it capped at 50 people, and then also just maybe making it available to simultaneously be viewed electronically for those people who don't attend in person. Those are all options, and each condominium corporation is going to have to figure out its own solution based upon the size and nature of your community. It's going to be easier for smaller condominiums and a little more challenging for larger condos. So that's, I think, the trend that we're seeing. Okay. Property manager. To host a voting meeting via Zoom, can we pass a bylaw collecting proxy before the meeting, essentially a non-voting meeting? Do we need a minimum number of attendees even if we have approval by proxy? I'm not sure what you mean by passing a bylaw, but you can do what was being suggested before, sort of a hybrid meeting where you ask for voting for the election of directors to be done by proxy in advance. And then once you have those proxies, that establishes your quorum, and then it doesn't matter how many people attend the electronic portion of the meeting. I think that answers your question. So you're basically holding a meeting by proxy and then supplementing that with a Zoom meeting. And I think that's going to be a common trend. Bruno's saying here, not everyone can use Zoom. I don't agree. I mean, okay, fine. There's some people who can't use Zoom, but who are those people? And would those people necessarily attend an in-person meeting during COVID? It seems to me, Bruno, and maybe I'm wrong, that the people who cannot use Zoom or equivalent software, I mean, you can use it on your smartphone, right? Like, so it's not necessarily that you would need to have a laptop with a camera and a microphone, just like I'm using here. You could just do it, boom, on your cell phone. And I would say that adoption of cell phones, smartphones in Ontario is well above 95% of the population. So you're going to see a very small number of people who don't have the ability to use Zoom or some sort of equivalent software. And if we're talking about those people, might also be the same people who would not attend the meeting in person, and so they can just vote by proxy. And I think they're no worse for wear. Olivia, by the way, these are all the issues I wanted to talk about today, so this is great. Thank you for all these questions. And we continue talking about electronic meetings. More questions. Olivia, with the current 50 people restriction, including staff and guests, etc., does this total number mean 50 people, including other residents inside the rec center, or only 50 in your own AGM? 50 in the room. 50 in the room. So if you have a recreation center and you're going to use a large room, it's 50 people in that room, provided that the room is big enough. So gatherings of more than 50 people. If you have like a gym somewhere else, that's totally separate. That doesn't eat into your 50 people, Olivia. Andrea, our building demographics are such that there are a lot of older residents that are not computer savvy. What do you suggest? I suggest that you do an electronic meeting, and that the residents who are not computer savvy, who choose not to participate in the electronic meeting and instead choose to participate via proxy, that's fine. And I would say that for those older residents who are not computer savvy, who are unable to, click a link and open a Zoom meeting on their cell phone, for those people, as I said before, I tends to be that they would also not attend the meeting in person. So there's really no difference there, in a certain sense. And I give more credit to the people who may not be computer savvy, but they figure it out, or they get help from their family or friends. I've had to do quite a few Zoom meetings for a variety of different situations, not just related to my work, but I also have had to do them for things such as religious events or funerals even. And the older people who have wanted to participate in these meetings have been able to do so without difficulty. And I regularly, after they do it once, it's not that hard. So I think with a little bit of help, the non-computer savvy people can participate via Zoom, and they might actually prefer it to having to sit there in a meeting with a mask on, feeling scared or unsafe. So I still think that electronic meetings are the way to go for 2020, and for the people who are not computer savvy, they can get help, and they can do it. It will not be that hard. Harland, is there a deadline for valid proxies, like 24 hours before the AGM? Are we able to insist that proxies be brought to the management office and signatures be witnessed by management staff to be valid? I don't have a problem with setting a deadline for submission, like 24 hours in advance kind of thing. If you're holding an electronic meeting, because at some point you have to be able to start the meeting, and you could say that it's for sanitization or for all different reasons. So if you wanted to say that you want the proxies submitted 24 hours in advance, I don't have a problem with that. As for signatures to be witnessed by management staff to be valid, nope, that is not. Signatures do not have to be witnessed on the proxy form, and they certainly don't have to be witnessed by management staff. And also, it's not safe. What if someone can't? What if someone can't sign it in person because they are in isolation? And also, part of the purpose of a proxy is to allow someone to vote because they're not in the country, or they're nowhere close to the meeting and they can't attend. And so for those people, they still have to be entitled to vote in proxy. So I think that requiring the signatures to be witnessed by management is a no-go. Then Harlan says, thank you for answering all of my questions. Well, I'm glad. This is great, Harlan. I'm answering them for you, and I'm answering them for everybody. So they're great questions, and I thank you so much. So that's a lot about electronic meetings. and a lot of my views in support of electronic meetings, and how I think that the non-computer savvy people will be able to do it if they really wanted to. If they're motivated, they can do it. And there may be people who just don't want to, and that's fine. So that's a lot about that. Let's talk about mask policies. So my main man, John Tory, has been talking about directing City of Toronto staff to put together a bylaw to make masks mandatory in common areas of residential, apartment, and condominium buildings. He had a crack at this the first time when they passed the mask bylaw, and they specifically did not include condos. And then he was sort of asked why, and he was like, oh, well, we were hoping that the condos would do their own policies, but if they don't, we're going to do it for them. And I don't believe him. I think that it was just like they never thought about it, or it was an oversight, or they thought it wasn't a good idea. And then everyone was like, well, what about us? And then he was like, of course. So anyways, now we're in this situation where we have condos passing mask policies, which I'm totally fine with, and we're doing them like all day here. We're just cranking out mask policies for people. But we might have bylaws coming down the pipe from the City of Toronto and perhaps other municipalities as well, I'm not sure, that would make it mandatory in all condominiums. So anyways, our stuff is written to anticipate that may happen, and we'll see what happens. But I expect that there will be some kind of policy or bylaw rather from the city making masks in residential buildings, common areas mandatory. So there you go. Something to look out for. But in the meantime, we're going to keep writing our policies as we do. And we think we've got a really good one. So, yeah. Carrie. Hi, Brad. Good to see you. Different topic. I love different topics. If the temporary bylaw remasks in condo common areas passes, what does that mean for corporations and management? Example, enforcement and penalties. Okay, enforcement. Let's talk about enforcement. So enforcing policies and rules and declarations is tricky stuff. So let's talk about what you don't do. Do not physically prevent someone from entering the building simply because they are not wearing a mask. So I don't want physical confrontations. It is counterproductive to the reason why we ask people to wear masks, right? We ask people to wear masks to promote safe distance. So don't go up to people and stop them if they're not wearing a mask. Just try to identify them. Like, hey, who are you? Where are you going to visit? What unit is this? Could you please put a mask on? That kind of thing, if you've got security staff. If you don't have security staff, then you're basically on a complaints-based system where people are writing to you saying so-and-so wasn't wearing a mask. So you're either going to have security or you're not. You're not going to physically stop people. You're going to start with a warning letter. You're going to give people a time, like a grace period to get used to it. And then after that, you're going to enforce with letters from the manager. And then in the most serious or wanton cases of non-compliance, you're going to refer it to the lawyer, and they're going to get a lawyer's letter. And depending on your condominium corporation's declaration and the indemnity that may be in your declaration, you might be able to charge back the legal costs if the legal costs are reasonable and if you can prove that the person wasn't wearing a mask, contrary to the policy, etc. So enforcement is possible. You would enforce basically in the same manner as you enforce your rules, bylaws, and declaration, because the policy is an interpretation of your rules, bylaws, and declaration, which already requires people to conduct themselves in the building in a safe and appropriate manner. So you're simply saying, we interpret our existing documents as requiring masks, and then if the person doesn't wear a mask, they're breaching the existing documents. So that's how you do it. Now you know all my stuff. Penalties. You do not fine people, right? The only penalty is potentially the cost of a legal letter, but you do not fine people. It's not like a $50 fine or whatever if you don't wear a mask. If the city comes up with a bylaw, that's different, and then you can call bylaw enforcement or whatever, and they can get a fine from the city, but not from the condo. Alrighty. Olivia, even if you set the deadline, registration, RSVP, cap the limit to 1 day in advance, legally, can we turn down proxies after the deadline or by registration time on the day of the AGM? So Olivia, the idea of having a proxy delivery deadline has to do more so with electronic meetings than it does an in-person meeting, right? Because an in-person meeting, someone can show up at that moment and hand you a proxy, and then you have a difficult decision to make as to whether to accept it or not. And most of the time you're going to accept it to avoid a dispute over the validity of the election, right? That's the safer option, is to just accept it even if you had a deadline. So that's what happens with an in-person meeting. But with an electronic meeting, it's different, right? The proxies have to be collected by a person in a place at a time, and then the electronic meeting happens in a boardroom. It might be off-site, and so in order to be counted, the proxies have to be received by a certain date and time. Otherwise, they just won't be counted. And it's not like someone can show up to your electronic meeting 5 minutes before you start and hand it to you. It's happening somewhere else. The proxies are with the person who's moderating the electronic meeting. They have the proxies with them, and if they don't have your proxy, they don't have your proxy. So I think the answer for setting a deadline for delivery works better for electronic meetings than it does for in-person. And if you set a deadline for registration for delivery of proxies, and people try to bring them after the deadline, maybe because of COVID, you could say, sorry, I'm not going to take any piece of paper from you that hasn't been, sanitized or whatever for at least 24 hours. I'm not taking it. And that's what you do. And I think that that's okay, but it's not great. It's not great. But you're going to get into a fight with people, especially if that proxy would have changed the outcome of the election. Then it's really not great. So there you go. Francis, can you outline the timeline to hold an AGM, including pre-notice to virtual meeting dates since the emergency order expiry? Yes. Okay. So it depends on your fiscal year end, Francis. So yes, but I did a table, and I can sort of tell you what it says. Just give me a second here. So let's take one example, and if people want me to do more examples, I can do more. So let's take the example of a fiscal year end of December 31st. Normally, your meeting deadline is after 6 months, so June 30th, and that's the most common crunch, is the June AGM crunch. Where you have a lot of condos have December 31st year ends, maybe like 40% or something like that. And so you have a lot of meetings in June. It's a very busy time. But this year we didn't because of COVID. So because of the temporary amendments to the Condominium Act, what would have been a June 30th deadline is now an October 22nd deadline. And it's an October 22nd deadline for a bunch of different people. So for anyone with a September, October, November, or December year end. If you have September, October, November, December as your fiscal year end, you are now having your AGM deadline as October 22nd, 2020. So it's a huge, huge crunch. So do not have you're December 31st. So this is great. So you're not going to have your AGM scheduled for October 22nd because that's the deadline for like a lot of condos, like half of the condos. So if you're going to have your meeting then you're going to have a really hard time getting your auditor, and you're going to have a really hard time getting a lawyer, or even your senior people at your management company. None of these people are going to be available on October 22nd. That's like the big crunch deadline. So you're going to try and do it sometime sooner. So let's say that you want to do it a little bit sooner. Let's say you're going to try and do it October 5th. And I chose that date for a specific reason. So the timeline for calling a meeting is 35 days. So you're going to get your preliminary notice out by September 1st, and then you're going to get your notice of meeting out by September 20th, I think, approximately. So you're going to, in so doing, you're going to hit your 35-day preliminary notice, your 15-day notice of meeting, and then your meeting on October 5th. So that's basically it. You've got those two deadlines, and you've got and you can spread them out more, right? You can send out your notice of meeting instead of sending it out on the very last day on the on September 20th or whatever. You can send it out a couple days earlier, and you can send your preliminary notice out a couple days earlier as well. And that's a really great idea and a safe thing to do. And so from now, that gives you about a month, basically the month of August, to figure out what you're going to do, set a meeting date in October, get your notice out in late August or early September, get your notice of meeting out 15 days before your meeting, maybe a couple days earlier than that, and then hold your meeting. And something that might be in your governing documents in addition to all of that is there might be provisions in your governing documents that say if something is mailed out, you have to add days for mailing, and if so, add days for mailing. So maybe it says 2 business days or 24 hours. Every condo seems to have different provisions in there where they want you to add days if you're giving notice by mail. So if you're giving notice by email, then you don't have to add days. Thank you, very helpful. You're welcome. You're welcome. So yeah, so we got the October 22nd crunch for a lot of condos, and then we've got a November 21st deadline for January 31st year ends. The February year end, they get the short end of the stick. Their deadline is technically August 31st, 2020, which meant that you've got to call your meeting now. That's not good. A lot of those people are going to miss their deadline. And then the March 31st year end, September 30th, 2020 is the normal deadline. And same for all of the other April 30th, May 31st, June 30th. All those year ends are going to have their regular deadlines for 2020, the regular 6 months. So that's a very short explanation as to meeting deadlines for 2020. And then for 2021, you're going to have your normal AGM. So you might actually get a really short year for some of these condos, right? So for December 31st year end, you're going to have your 2020 AGM maybe in October, and then you're going to have your 2021 in June again. So you're going to be doing a short year. So it's not like a calendar year before you do your next meeting. So that's it, basically. That's the stuff I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about deadlines for meetings. I wanted to talk about board meetings. I wanted to talk about mask bylaws, stage 3. Stage 3. What's really big about stage 3? Gyms, right? Condo gyms. Because in stage 3, commercial gyms can open. And so that, to my mind, is a sign that condo gyms can open. Now, does it mean that you have to open your gym? Of course not. It just means that you can if you're ready and if it's safe to do so, and if your gym equipment is laid out in such a way that people can exercise while maintaining 2 meters distance from each other. So what would you do to open your gym, right? Well, let's say you got 3 treadmills in a row. Boom, boom, boom. Well, maybe you put some tape on the middle treadmill or unplug it or whatever, and say out of order due to COVID, and then you just have the 2 treadmills with the empty one in the middle. You reduce your capacity, you reduce the amount of equipment, so that you have fewer people exercising at the same time. Maybe you're requiring a mask to be worn in the gym, something I think a lot of condos are going to require. And in so doing, you can reopen your gym. But it's not just business as usual. You don't just turn the lights on and say, have at it. There are rules in place that apply to these indoor amenities, and if you're not able to comply with those rules, then you can't open. If your gym's too small and there's no room for people, then it's not happening. So that's about it for me. I thank you all for your questions. They were really great. If there's no more questions coming in, then 40 minutes is a good session, a good live stream, and we'll see you all next week. You can save up your questions and ask Brian. But if there's one or two more, then I'll answer them, and if not, then we'll call it a day. So I'll just give it a quick second here, see if anything gets typed in. Doesn't look like it. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your questions. All the stuff that you want to talk about is all the stuff I want to talk about, which is great because then I know mostly what the answers are. And so for Toronto and Peel, get ready for stage 3. And for Julia, hey Julia, and for everyone else who's already in stage 3, I hope you're doing okay. And stay home, stay safe, and we will see you all again very soon. Take care, everyone. I'm just gonna log off here.